it was because he was a rabid Nazi. And the divorce was just the excuse. He went charging off to Berlin, pictures with his best buddy Adolf Hitler in full Nazi gear. The whole royal family has been Nazi right up until till the end of the last war. The Queen's tutor was Sir Henry Martin, a Fabian communist, from the age of 12 to the age of 22. The royal family is completely behind the European Union, and the Queen is one of the primary instigators of it. And no one has risked more for the European Union than the Queen, because when she signed the first 4 treaties, all the treason laws were still in place, and she should have hung by the neck till dead under for every treaty. She risked her life for the EU. Do these treason...
When you say hung by the neck, you mean as an act of treason?
Yes, absolutely.
But isn't she, as the monarch, surely it's her thing, it's her empire, it's her country, her treaty?
No, we are the sovereign people of the nation. She is our servant, and if you remember, King Charles I had his head chopped off for treason, so her head should have been chopped off 4 times. The EU and all its laws are illegal under the British Constitution, and everything the Queen and the government has done is illegal.
Does that mean, are you not committing treason then in this case in some respect?
No, I'm trying to uphold the British Constitution.
Dougie says, can you ask David to explain what he meant by a political party having to have voters in 10 countries? As far as I'm aware, no party has this capability.
Oh yes, they do. The 2 European parties do, the EPP and the PES.
Right, so an individual European country couldn't have that, which is the point, I suppose, so that they can't have that power. But you just mentioned 2 European parties.
You got it in one.
I never heard of these parties. Who are they?
Party of the European Socialists, PES, and the European People's Party.
Can I join these?
You'll have to soon, because when the Conservative, Labour and Lib Dem parties are abolished, you'll either have to join one of those 2 parties or leave politics.
Stephen Battersea, at the risk of sounding stupid, why exactly is the Labour Party so hell-bent on the Lisbon Treaty?
It isn't just the Labour Party, it's all the parties. It was... The Conservatives are the primary instrument of the European Union in Britain.
The Conservatives, did you say?
The Conservatives, yeah. All the parties are completely pro-Europe. The leadership of all our parties has been corrupted by the European Union. It's not just Labour.
Here's a call from James in Ayrshire. James, hello.
Oh, hello. One or 2 questions, if I may, David. I feel very angry about the EU because I feel that I was duped into voting for membership, for the EEC, which you referred to, under Ted Heath. And at that time I was under the impression it was purely a nice little economic arrangement for fair trade and so on, or easier trade. I'm angry that it clearly was not that at all. There was far more to it, as we've all seen. And I agree with everything you've said. Britain is clearly going down the tube in so many ways that it would take too long to go into. But I've got 2 sort of basic questions at the moment. The first one is maybe an obvious one. Surely the 3 mainstream parties, I know UKIP are against the EU and would try to get us out, but they're not a power, unfortunately. Why is it that the 3 mainstream parties, who presumably have people who are bright enough to see the destruction of Britain, why are they going along with it? And secondly, the average man in the street can also see it, and most people I talk to can see how the EU is gradually destroying Britain, and we're all being muzzled. We can hardly, the human rights laws and other laws are muzzling us. We're almost frightened to talk out anymore. What can the people do? And also, why are all senior politicians, as you say, of all parties, so in favour of the destruction of Britain?
They are under the misapprehension that they will benefit greatly from the gravy train if they are not already. The government's biggest expenditure now, according to the Cabinet Office, and it was reported in every newspaper, is the 167 billion spent on pro-EU quangos, which bribe over 100,000 people a year with 150,000 a year plus salaries to smooth the way for the European Union. That's the 8,500 quangos, most of them controlled by common purpose.
How much money was that?
167 billion, according to the Cabinet Office.
Do you know what I read today? That for 45 billion, you could take 14 million Brits in lower income out of the tax bracket altogether.
We've just had the longest period of prosperity, the biggest boom in our history. The European Union now gobbles a third of our gross domestic product, that 167 billion, and the 100 billion it costs, according to the Government Better Regulation Commission, to implement EU regulations. If it hadn't have been for that, the minimum wage would be £20 an hour now. The fact it's still £5 an hour is all down to the EU.
Staggering. James, thank you, sir, for that. We're going to take a short pause and we're back for a final burst with David Noakes. Another couple of questions here. This one in from Ven, who says, I've been concerned about the whole EU thing for some time. One question, though, if private ownership of houses is to be discouraged, why crash the house prices?
Well, how do you take houses away from people? If you give everyone negative equity, they lose the houses automatically and the banks end up owning them. It's perfect. It works like a dream.
This one in from Ian, who says, David has held anti-EU views, or was there has David always held anti-EU views, or was there a moment of revelation, says Sean in Bristol. I apologise.
About 10 years ago, I started to read the EU treaties and laws. I wasn't particularly interested up to that point, but then when as soon as I realised what they meant, that was it.
This is Tony in Bermondsey. Tony, hello.
Yeah, hello. Would the open door policy of immigration have anything to do with watering down our society if we were going to a vote?
That's quite a hot potato, isn't it, immigration? That would make sense on what he just said.
Right, this is a Frankfurt School subversion technique. Since the EU got control of our borders in the 1997 Amsterdam Treaty, they've let 10 million immigrants in. The government won't give you the figures, but that is a pretty accurate one. 2.7 million came in last year alone. The aim is to create overcrowding, tension and a loss of identity, and it's been extremely effective.
Tony, thank you for that. This one in from, I think it might be, it's from Brian in Brum. Could your guest, confirm if Tony Blair forms any part of the EU conspiracy? I'd imagine a big part from your perspective. Would that be reasonable, David?
We think every Prime Minister gets £10 million for each EU treaty they pass, so Tony Blair will have got 20 million. Gordon Brown will get 10 million for this treaty, Lisbon. It was rather obvious when Ted Heath got paid, because he went from being a pauper to suddenly being able to spend £1 million on an Admiral's Cup team, and he also, of course, bought a £3.5 million house near Salisbury.
Andy in Cannock, would it be reasonable to say we live in a dictatorship dressed up as a democracy?
We've been in the European Union since 1970, so we have been transforming from a democracy to a dictatorship, yes.
Terry says, this is a broken record. Europe is a great place to be. Let's enjoy it.
I totally agree. Europe's been a great place while it's been 27 free and independent democratic nations. But you go talk to the French, who voted against Europe, and they'll tell you it's becoming more and more like a police state. Let's have the 27 independent nations, and let's utterly abolish the dictatorship of the European Union forever.
What is the upshot of all of this? Because even if, David Noakes, it turns out that you're right, and we do have this rather brutal dictatorial system in the middle, it will still inevitably mean that Europeans, to use that phrase, go about their everyday business. They live somewhere, they eat, they heat their homes, they have their friends around for a bite to eat, they go to the pub. What really changes? What's the nub of the issue here, then? Well,
it's just what the last questioner said. Do you have a nice society where it's great to visit Europe and you love being with the French and the Spanish, or do you want a miserable existence as the poor people in Soviet Russia have had for the last 70 years?
But do you think it will really be like that?
Oh yes, definitely.
So we'll be ground down as a people with the subversive techniques you mentioned and goodness knows what else, that we are simply in the that submissive position to our government where we can do nothing. We have no voice. no right to reply, no democratic vote, low wages, average housing. It's going to be that a former communist dictatorship, you're saying?
Yes, there probably won't be another general election because Westminster will be abolished instead on the 5th of May. Our politicians have completely destroyed our democracy. We, the people, have no say. They completely rule us. 80% of us don't want to be in the EU, but the government implements EU laws, EU treaties, EU policies, not the wishes of the British people.
Two final points here, David. Sue in Bristol, could your guest explain why is it only the UK seems to obey the EU? France tells everybody where to go. True or false?
It is deliberate because these regulations only apply to Britain. It is only Britain that has to be utterly destroyed, and they are only aimed at Britain.